mental state has the potential to change his mind, has the potential to do things that are contrary to his eternal attributes.
Right, but here's the interesting thing about that, is if he does do things contrary to his eternal attributes, then he would cease to be God.
Sorry, one more time?
He would cease to be God if he were to choose to hate us.
So he would cease to be God if he chose?
So he loves us eternally, compassionately, willing to do anything he wants. He doesn't want to put us in hellfire. He can, but he doesn't want to. But if all of a sudden he becomes this vengeful, wicked God, then he ceases to be God and he has no power to save us.
Okay, so there's no power. So do I assume from that God isn't just?
God is completely just.
So he's completely just?
Yes.
So what is your understanding of justice? You have a God who is just and also loves. Mm-hmm. Does he have the potential, right, that word again, the potential to not be loving towards anyone?
Yeah, but then he would cease to be God.
Then he would cease to be God just by the mere fact that he can choose not to love someone.
Yeah.
Okay, so what about Hitler?
He loves him.
He loves him.
Yep.
So let's just assume Hitler. Well, we don't need to assume. Let's just say Hitler essentially got away scot-free. He committed suicide. He didn't face the justice of the world that he deserved to face, and now he's going to be with God in the hereafter.
Well, that's the interesting thing about it. Is that we don't just believe that there's heaven or hell. We believe that there are 3 degrees of heaven, and then there's outer darkness, which can be referred to as hell.
Outer darkness, did you say?
Yes.
Okay. And where does this outer darkness and where do these 3 levels of heaven exist? Do they exist in this earth, or do they exist outside of earth? Do they exist timelessly, or do they exist temporally?
Timeless.
Really?
Really.
Okay, so you have heaven that exists timelessly,
Right.
alongside God?
Yes.
How do changes take place in a timeless dimension? How do changes take place? Remember, let's define what time is here. Time is the measure of motion. Minus any motion, any mass, anything, there is no change. So if you have a timeless heaven, and remember, heaven is mass, or is it? So I've got to get this straight. Does heaven have a mass?
Yeah. Yes, it would have to. Yeah.
Right. So
it is all matter.
So this heaven, which has matter, exists timelessly.
Yep.
So can anything move in that timeless state?
Yep.
Really?
Yep.
How do things move when there is no time? There is no differentiation of space. There's no differentiation of time. How do things move? How does anything take place in a timeless state?
Well, it's probably like what happens in Interstellar.
Interstellar? I've seen
that.
that. Good movie.
You know that part where he goes into the Tesseract and it's like it's the 4th dimension.
Yep.
It's probably like that.
Really?
Yeah.
Anything about the Tesseract in your Mormon Bible?
It doesn't. No, it only covers the basic stuff in there.
Right. Is there anything in your Mormon Bible that claims that the 3 levels of heaven are going to be timeless?
No, that would be in the Doctrine and Covenants.
Doctrine and Covenants. And what does it say exactly? That in these 3 states of heaven, which are timeless, human beings will be able to move around, and there will be motion, etc.
Yep.
Okay, can you explain to me any physicist on this earth who has said, anyone who has said that in a timeless state, there's motion. In a timeless state, there's motion. Because I've never come across that.
Yeah, there's motion.
Okay, but look, think about it yourself. The only way you can have motion is through the linear progression of time.
Right, but
because that's the whole point of timeless.
So with what we have here, time, we can only go forward.
Yeah.
When in a timeless state, you can go forward or backwards.
No, you can't. There's no time. There's nothing to be measured. It's timeless. That's the reason why you have less at the end. Time. There is no time. When we say God is timeless, it means there is no time.
Well, I mean, I'm sure one day we'll understand that.
Look, one day it may be too late. It may be too late for me. It may be too late for you. But it seems like it certainly may be too late for you, because you're placing your entire faith in this idea that 3-dimensional heaven exists in a timeless state, but people can move around as if there is time. Is this part of the idea that God can do anything logically impossible things?
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah, so therefore God can have a heaven that is timeless and yet get people to move around in time. Okay, so therefore God can be temporarily eternal, God can be evil if he wanted to, God can be anything other than his absolute eternal attributes. Do words make any sense to us in this world? Yeah. Okay, does God have any way of communicating his truth through a means other than through words? Through a means other than words?
The Holy Spirit.
The Holy Spirit? Okay. And so the Holy Spirit comes into you. Okay, we'll come with that. We'll come with that. But let's just stick to this idea that that words are supposed to make sense to us, right? Because ultimately, the message that has come to the Mormons has been printed on pen and paper. Yes?
Yes, so yeah.
Well, unless there's some other means by which you're going to, transpose your knowledge onto me so that I can accept it.
So you're talking about the translation of the Book of Mormon?
No, just the words that are contained therein. I mean, look, God has communicated to the prophet Joseph Smith. So he's communicated to the prophet Joseph Smith. I presume that communication was in words because Joseph Smith wrote that communication down, that communicate.
Right. God told them what to write down.
Yes, okay, good. So, therefore, words are supposed to make sense. That's the only way through which God can communicate the truth.
Of course, he is the Word.
Yeah, good. So he's the Word. He uses words to communicate the truth. Truth can only be known through propositions. You know what a proposition is? It's a sentence that carries a true or false value. Yes? Yeah, you agree with me so far?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, therefore, if words make sense, and we come across words that we put together that are what you could describe as being mutually exclusive, i.e. contradictory in nature, what do normal people usually do in normal circumstances? Do they accept that as true or do they reject it as false?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
So the question is, if you have something and its opposite, like for example a married bachelor.
Okay, so like a contradiction?
A contradiction. So if you have a contradiction that's put to you, do normal people usually, over the course of history, do they usually accept that as being true or would they reject it as being false?
If there's a contradiction, they would want to figure out why there's a contradiction and either prove it right or wrong.
But I'm not talking about pretension. I'm talking about actual contradiction because look, you can't have something that is an actual contradiction and try and explain it away. There may be an misinterpretation, but what I'm giving to you is, let's just put it symbolically. A represents something. Its opposite, let's just call it not A. A, not A. Married, the opposite of married, bachelor. Those words have a definition. Now when you put them together and you claim that putting them together as a phrase is true, can that be true?
Like a married bachelor? No, that's not it.
Exactly. What's the squared? Sorry. Just give me 1 second. No, we're having a conversation, and then you can come in. Then you can come in after. Similarly, like married bachelor, you have a squared circle. You have a God that's temporarily eternal. You have a God that's good and evil at the same time. You have a God that's timeless.
No, he's just good.
Yeah, I know, but the concept. I'm giving you the concept. You believe that. What I'm trying to point out to you is that if words do make sense, no matter how much you try and repeat that something is true, when in reality it isn't, it won't make it true.
Nope.
That's my point. So words make sense. That's why God says in the Quran that God has created everything in pairs, opposites, so that you may reflect. Yeah? So our understanding has always been, check this out. What's your name, sorry?
Stephen,
sorry. Stephen, look. My name's Hamza, in case you've forgotten. We've always done, our very first pillar of Islam is beautiful, because it is the basis upon which our entire edifice, our entire understanding, our entire knowledge propels from, is established upon. The first pillar is La ilaha illallah. This means that it's established upon negation and affirmation. We negate that there are deities that can be associated with God in his worship. In other words, any false deities cannot be equalized with the true deity. Why? Because then you're bringing together two contradictories. And you and I, we agree that usually in the real world, in the world that we live in, people reject contradictions by necessity.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
I guess so, yeah.
Right, so therefore, when God told us, La ilaha illallah, there is none worthy of worship except God, It means that God, the true God, the one that you and I believe in, though we differ in our concept of him, the true God is the only one worthy of worship. Therefore, and Muslims actually believe that the laws of logic, the bi-valued laws of logic, the law of non-contradiction is something that God implanted within mankind as part of his fitrah. He planted that. Why? Because you can't have, unless you live in an impossible universe, the idea that opposites exist and can be true. But it seems like, Stephen, you're placing your entire faith in a concept of God that appears to be contradictory, and I find that troublesome.
I don't think he contradicts himself.
Okay. I'll tell you what, if you don't mind, Stephen, usually what I tend to do is I want to get in the habit of, and it's been 8 years since I came back to Speaker's Corner, but I want to get in the habit of keeping the discussions short. If I feel that we've come to an impasse, we've come to loggerheads with each other, if you don't mind, we'll stop there. And the way we might do this is, if you allow me just